Hey everyone, this is your first set of notes for Unit 5B. Again, we'll test on this right before Thanksgiving. Make sure that you are writing down your notes as we go. So we're talking about covalent nomenclature today. We've already talked about how to name ionic compounds, so now we're talking about how to name covalent compounds. So remember that a covalent compound has two or more nonmetals. When we name covalent compounds, we use prefixes and then the name of the element, and we still drop the ending of that second element and add IDE. So an example could be hydrogen monoxide. Some of the prefixes that you will need to know and be able to use for naming covalent compounds are listed here. So 1 is mono, 2 is di, 3 is tri, 4 is tetra, 5 is penta, 6 is hexa, 7 is hepta, 8 is octa, 9 is nona, and 10 is deca. So all of those are things that you need to practice and remember. One of the exceptions for naming covalent compounds is that we don't use the prefix mono for the first element. Even if there's only one of that first element, we don't have to put mono on it. If it's the second element and there's only one, then we would say mono. So an example is CO2. We call that carbon dioxide. We don't say monocarbon, it's just going to be carbon. So let's look at some examples. I have NCl5, so I'm going to go over here. So I have NCl5. So the first thing I need to do is just name my first element. It's nitrogen. Even though I only have one, I don't have to say mono on that one. So next I have Cl5, so you need to look at your prefix. Oh, there we go. Prefix for 5 is penta. So we would say pentachloride. So make sure you drop that ending and add IDE. Okay, my next one is CO. So I have CO. Again, if that first element only has one, you don't have to say mono. We can just say carbon. But now I just have one oxygen, so I would say monoxide. Make sure you add that IDE. That's telling me I have one oxygen. My next example says diphosphorus pentaoxide. So diphosphorus, di means 2, so P2. And then it says pentaoxide. Remember, oxygen is O. Penta means 5. So your formula would just be P2O5. Okay. How do we drop the ending of an element to add IDE? Just know that each element is different, and you kind of saw this a couple class periods ago when we started naming ionic compounds. For example, phosphorus changes to phosphide. It's not going to be phosphoride, it's just phosphide. Carbon changes to carbide, oxygen changes to oxide, nitrogen to nitride, chlorine to chloride, iodine to iodide, bromine to bromide, fluorine to fluoride, sulfur to sulfide, and selenium to seleniide. So this is one of those things that it just takes practice to kind of remember how to drop those endings. Like I said, some of them are different. It just takes some practice. Some other important information for covalent naming. A covalent compound is going to be neutral, which means it has no charge. So before, when we talked about ionic, we said ionic does have a charge, even though it's not written. Covalents are neutral, there's no charge. So we would not use this covalent naming system for molecules such as SO4-2, which is a polyatomic ion. So you shouldn't see your polyatomic ion list when we're talking about covalent compounds, because these are all neutral. Polyatomic ions have their own naming system. A couple other things. If a compound has a hydrogen at the beginning and the molecule is neutral, then we use the acid naming system. And we're going to get into this and probably next week. So if there's a H at the beginning, like HClO3, that's an acid. That H at the beginning is what's making it an acid. Again, we'll talk about that later. Many covalent compounds have a commonly used nickname that we can use instead of using the prefixes. Some examples could be CH4, could be called methane, NH3 could be called ammonia. So this is just letting you know that sometimes you might see something with a common name or a nickname instead of using prefixes. That's just when we can use a nickname, we will do that. Okay, that is it for these notes. Make sure you work on the covalent compound practice sheet, and we will go over it as a class.